in the e-commerce world and how that applies to propane dealers specifically in this case. And again, like you, we are very disappointed that NPGA couldn't happen. Obviously, there, I think, extenuating circumstances would be the understatement of the century. So we decided to hold our session and give people a chance to see this content. We had a great response from NPGA and a great response from registrants. And that's not to say that we're patting ourselves in the back. I just think the topic is important. This concept of a digital-first consumer has challenged a lot of industries, including our own, and hope today to shed a little light on that and help you thrive, because again, it is fairly new to our industry in terms of engaging customers in a different way than the traditional touch points that we've had. And we were honored to speak at NPGA, and we're honored to be here this morning. I really want to give a shout out to the folks on the West Coast. That's pretty early time in the day to be jumping on a webinar. I hope we can do a good job and make it worth getting out of bed early. Again, much appreciated. A little housekeeping is that you're all muted, but this was designed to be a panel session. When we were going to NPGA, we weren't there to sell anything. I'll tell you who I am in a minute. You'll hear me mention the name of our company once during my introduction, and I won't mention it again after. This is not a sales pitch. The idea of a panel discussion was, I do a lot of speaking around the industry, both in propane and heating oil and hybrid and other parts of the industry as well. But I thought it would be more important and more impactful to have an interactive session between the audience, which now is you, in a digital world, speaking of digital first, with a panel of really bona fide experts. Not that I don't consider myself an expert, but I like to involve people who are dealers, who are very close to dealers, who are working daily with dealers. I do on some level, but not as much as I used to. So Ted and Julia were kind enough to want to speak in Nashville, although I think the lure was more Nashville than it was my session, more than likely. And again, were kind enough and generous enough to join us today. What I'm trying to do in this forum is to continue the informal, interactive nature of this session. I really enjoy panel sessions. I like to walk the room. I like to see how dealers of all sizes and shapes engage a panel of their peers. Those conversations tend to be pretty fascinating. It's a little harder to reproduce that in this format, but we'll do our best today. All the pressure will be on Julie and Ted, not on me, obviously. So it will be informal, but this is your session. When I say your session, Ted and Julie, this is really their show. I'm just a moderator and the MC. I'll share a couple of thoughts at the beginning here. But we really want to make sure that you learn something, have a little fun, kick back, have your coffee. That's what I'm doing here in the mountains of New Hampshire. But because the phones are muted, you're going to have to type your questions into chat. Adrian and I are both, Adrian, who is doing the introduction, are both monitoring the phones. I've already gotten questions. Some of the folks that know me who are on the session today have preempted the webinar and sent me some questions for Julie and Ted. And so we'll try to get to all of that and get you done here in an hour, which is certainly our goal. So it would seem very awkward to have a webinar this morning and not make note of the crisis that we're all in. This certainly presented an unimaginable list of challenges to us as a society, as our families, literally our health and well-being, and our businesses. And this is not meant to pander to anyone. This is really a heartfelt thank you to all of you on the phone. You know, I saw statistics over the weekend that 90% of the country is on some form of lockdown, but not everybody has that luxury. And the fuel dealers are certainly not one of the group that has the luxury of staying at home and shutting down their business and hiding out. You guys provide an unbelievably essential service to the communities. You have to stay open. It really is sort of what you do, right? I tell this story once in a while when I'm speaking about Apollo 13, and for those of you not old enough to remember what happened at Apollo 13, and even some folks on the phone who might not be old enough because it was 1995 when the movie came out, it was a very, very famous exchange when the explosion happened, and two of the directors said, "This is the worst moment in the history of NASA." And Gene Kranz, who was a fighter pilot and the flight director, said, "This is actually our moment to shine." And I think this is, certainly rings true for fuel dealers, that in a crisis like this, that has people thinking sort of about three essential things: food, healthcare, and the comfort of my home. And you are a critical link in that. My propane dealer up here in New Hampshire showed up on Friday, and it was a weird thing. I didn't expect them to not show up, but when they pulled in the driveway, I have to admit to a sigh of relief. So again, thank you. We know that you're working extremely hard under very, very difficult circumstances, and we'll get through this together. But definitely hats off, or chapeau, as the French say. So here's our panelists, and I'm going to let Ted and Julie introduce themselves because they both have really, really strong resumes. So Ted, why don't you introduce yourself first, since your picture showed up first there, and then Julie can go. I'll do a quick one, and then we'll jump right in.
Yeah, let me just comment. I think Julie's picture should have gone first. And it's like the beast and then beauty, but should have gone the other way around. But in any event,
Beast book ended the beauty.
Oh, there you go. The rose between two thorns. Perfect. I've been in the retail heating oil and propane business since 1974, which probably is earlier than many of you were born. I've worked for small independent marketers, and I've worked for national marketers, MLPs, both NGL and Energy. Stargas was also more of a regional MLP in the heating oil space back when MLPs were invented in the mid-90s. And I've been mainly in the operations end of it, not a marketing guy per se, but in the decentralized world that Energy was, you had to become an expert, or at least knowledgeable on many different subjects. We didn't have a corporate office that pushed all that technology down to us. We had to ask for the things that we wanted and justify why they were valuable, and why we wanted to spend some of the company's money to do that. So I live in central Massachusetts. I've lived here my whole life, and I expect to complete my my tour of on the earth here. So that's me.
Thanks, Ted. Julia, why don't you give us your background, please?
Good morning, everybody. My name is Julia Miller, and I am the Vice President of Business Growth and Development for Blue Ox Energy Corporation. So we are located in upstate New York, and we do home heating, fuel, and propane, as well as own a chain of convenience stores. My role with the company is and has been, I'm directly over all sales and marketing initiatives. So my partner and I have a joke that basically I just find a way to sell everything, and he finds a way to make it all happen and deliver it. I also work with a couple other groups. I'm on the advisory committee for our backend software system, and I've worked with Mark quite a few times on some of his projects, and I also work with another company to help really talk about technology and how it can transform your business, because we've done it. So I'm excited to share some of the things that we've accomplished with you guys on the call today. As always, really excited to hear the questions, and hopefully we can, share some information that'll inspire you to keep going down your technology path.
Great, thank you. And again, my name is Mark Stillman. I'm the guy on the right with a face for radio /webinars. I, by trade, am an investment banker and have built a lot of businesses in my career. I got into energy by mistake. I wasn't born and raised in like a lot of folks were. I got into it in 1995 when Heating Oil Partners spun out of Louis Dreyfus. And they were looking for M&A people. And also I have a strange background specialty in product hedging and procurement, both for propane and distillates and gasoline. That's where it started. I ended up working for them. I ended up working for some of the MLP propane companies, mostly doing analyst work, doing some hedging and procurement work. Fell in love with the space, but immediately recognized that technology was definitely part of the future. So I switched gears in 2000 and started working with technology companies, either as an advisor or helping folks raise money to build technology companies for this industry. And lo and behold, not that I was a genius, but we fast forward to today, and it's an industry that is really being defined by the acquisition of really smart technology. Ted has experience with that. I asked Julie to join. As she said, my job currently is I run a consulting firm called Energy Edge Advisory Group, but I am also the founder and an executive with Energy Engine, which is actually the sponsor of today's session. We have an e-commerce software package that is used by many, many dozens and dozens of dealers of varying sizes, from one truck to thousands, for e-commerce, for fuel, for heating oil, propane, and a variety of other services that are done in the e-commerce world. As part of that, Julie has done some projects with us, because as you'll hear in a minute, Julie does a really great job and has done a great job of implementing a pretty sophisticated technology ecosystem geared towards consumers. So we all have backgrounds in this industry. We kind of came in at different ways, but hopefully have the ability to answer your questions. So before we jump to the panel, I just wanted a little context, so indulge me 5 minutes here. Some of this might be what I call, Captain Obvious, duh, but it's always interesting when I give this presentation or share some of these slides. There's always a moment when people go, wow, I never really thought of that. So in terms of, the world we're living in, it feels very normal to be always connected all the time, but it's only been a decade. My daughter is 15 and she was 3 years old when the iPhone came out. So she doesn't know anything different, but a lot of us do. So if you think as a context and time reference of a decade, roughly a decade, right? Facebook was competing with MySpace. Nobody's even heard of MySpace. Amazon was a bookstore, had a rather benign and fairly crappy coffee store in the back. The iPhone was just released. We used to go to the store, remember stores and malls and all that? We really don't do that anymore. And the word e-commerce certainly was not part of our lexicon. But that has changed dramatically, obviously, and our world is entirely different. But when you think about all that's occurred in terms of consumers, all that's occurred in the way that we engage everyone in our lives, ourselves, our families, work, our businesses that we work with, whatever those things are, we're talking about this monumental shift that's occurred in just over a decade. It's pretty mind-bending. If you look at the way other technology revolutions occurred, certainly the Industrial Revolution, those were generational time arcs. This is a decade. This is not even half a generation. It's not even a third of a generation. So the speed at which this occurred has been pretty incredible. But it has challenged businesses because we're trying to catch up, and it's not just us. So what I call this world that we live in now is that it's full of customers you don't know. Is that as the digital revolution, if you will, the revolution's been won. It's more of a transformation. It really created a whole new customer for your fuel business. But it really just created new customers in general. Consumers, with the advent of the internet, the advent of the smartphone, have full transparency. They know everything about you. They know they have massive amounts of alternatives. They are extremely demanding on the level of service that they get from you. They've become certainly a little bit less loyal, but they most definitely look and act in ways that we've never really seen before. Certainly in the fuel business. The fascinating thing about the fuel business is that for generations, and we have a customer at our company, a client who's been in business since 1854. That is not an exaggeration. We're talking pre-Civil War here. So this industry is defined by really proud, family-owned, independent businesses that go back a very long time. And the propane industry is sometimes pretty close to 100 years even. And we're kind of used to a certain customer, right? We built the business, we built the business engagement model, we built the customer model. the habits of our customers were largely shaped by our competitors, and it was going pretty well. And it was actually pretty easy. It was really, really nice. When I worked on the propane side for an MLP in the early 2000s, it was really cool. Customers were happy, we were happy, it all was symbiotic, it all worked. And now it's not that way anymore. And it's because our customers are not thinking about competitors of yours. They're thinking about how they do business everywhere else, buying cars, going to the bank, doing their taxes, whatever that might be, toys for their kids through Amazon. Those experiences are now implicating their experience with you, and they're scratching their heads because suddenly that proud model that we have seems a little out of sync with a digital consumer. The telephone visits to your appliance center and showrooms have been replaced by a customer who doesn't want to talk to you anymore. And it's really forcing us to adapt, right? So really quickly, some of this stuff might be fun, some of it might not be, but who are these customers? We talk about them as if they're a separate group. They're us, first of all. We're all doing these things. We're all doing everything online. We're all demanding self-service, which is really that's the thesis of what we're talking about. Consumers want self-service. 9 out of 10 consumers want self-service. And when they say self-service, they don't mean just paying a bill. They mean doing everything. From the minute they get to know you on the whole journey, all the way through to becoming a loyal, referenceable customer, they want to do it themselves. 90% of your customers expect e-commerce now, 90%. If you don't have e-commerce or a really good portal that can do more than take payments, then essentially you're letting down roughly 90% of consumers. You most certainly have to have a mobile responsive website or an app. Consumers have very little patience for anything that they can't do on their telephone. Laptops, even tablets are becoming a thing of the past. 88% of these folks, including us, have used an automated solution, and more than half of them said it improved their overall experience with you. The message there is, if you don't allow for automation, then you're going to start to fail your customers. This is interesting. I like to always say here, obviously millennials are driving a lot of this, right? 90% of them say they want to do business not just with somebody who does online engagement. It's easy to take a payment or an order. They want reminders, they want notifications, they want things done by text, they'd like information about your company, they'd like to use you as a resource. They don't want to do one way, they want two-way communication. However, although a lot of us here on the phone would say, yeah, but my customer base, they're older, they don't use the internet. The number is actually higher, 90% for Gen X, 91% for baby boomers have the same thing. They want a digital relationship with you. They don't want an input-only relationship with you. And then I have the 90-90-90 rule, which is really just to say that email is fast becoming, as my daughter would say 10 minutes ago, right? 90% of text messages are read and 90% get responded to within 90 minutes. We're so conditioned to be texted things, email is a nuisance. So it's affecting our dealer, right? We have a proud history of traditional touch points, phone, mail, visits to the showroom, a lot of handshakes, a lot of intimacy, but we don't really live in that world anymore. Consumers appreciate the service. They appreciate you being there. They appreciate you taking care of them. They just don't want to engage you in the same way. It's important to try to make that distinction, right? In terms of propane, as I said earlier, there's a lot of folks that will argue that the digital relationship conflicts with the traditional value prop. That, Mark, that's not how we're built. That's not our DNA. The thing is you can't dig your heels in and do that. The customers are making the choices, not you. Your challenge is to change the way you have your business constructed, to change the way your customers engage with you, to make sure that you have the right tools for them to use. It is not your job to dig in and say, this is not how we do things. We are not immune to this digital transformation. I've seen a couple of presentations over the last 5 years saying essentially that until Amazon can deliver propane, then we don't care about digital consumers. That's a very risky mindset. I've also heard somebody say that we want to be the last milkman. I don't think we want to be the last milkman either. There's no pride in that. Although I hear because of this crisis that home delivery of milk is coming back. So be that as it may. Customers are harder to impress than keep. They don't want to use the phone. We know that. They don't appreciate 8 to 4 hours. They don't know what even hours are. They do all their banking and propane business at night when they're sitting around. This consumer-owned tank thing is accelerating for sure. We know it's controversial. We're going to talk through that with the panel in a second. We know that self-service tools are where it's at for this consumer. But with all due respect, the dealer community has been slow to adopt some of these customer service tools, online customer service tools. Consumers are often left frustrated because they can't do what they want to do with you online. They can maybe make a payment, and that's not what they really want to do. And Julie will speak to that in a minute. And dealers are working really hard to get in sync. We know that. We know that portals have become more prominent. We see them a lot. They're really good for use on your existing customers, but they're a data in sort of medium, meaning customers can do things, but there's not really a digital relationship being created. They don't work for transient customers looking for things, looking to transact with you who may not already be a customer. They're sort of a lockdown for, it's a secret club for your customers. But where we need to be headed is this sort of mythical e-commerce, right? How do you engage and satisfy today's really demanding consumer? Their fuel consumer is as demanding as they are when they buy anything else. But e-commerce is an amazing vehicle. We know what it's done. It's transformed every industry in the world, and it will transform ours if we let it. The idea is, how do we apply it? How do we do it smartly? First thing, without doubt, is that growth is key, right? We know that propane in the industry, and for those of you who are in both heating oil and propane, or in co-ops doing a lot of different things, I think that growth is key. The industry contracted from 12 billion down to about 7 billion gallons, and now we've popped back up closer to 9, but it's a war for market share. It's a war to gain customers. You look at every other industry out there that is experiencing growth, e-commerce is driving that growth. In some cases, they've abandoned their traditional business development efforts. And again, Ted and Julie will get into that in a second. You have to attract and service new customers. You have to be in the new lead business. You have to be in the growth business. It has to be done online. Lots and lots of sort of shotgun marketing and sales reps is not really doing it anymore. Nobody wants to handle it, signing up as a customer with those mediums. I think the other key about e-commerce is you have to think about digital relationships. And this one causes a lot of questions. But in essence, what we're saying here is that your system, your e-commerce system, has to talk back to your customers. It has to provide them answers. It has to reward them for behaviors. It has to thank them, all of those things in an automated way, not driven by email. And that's a cornerstone of e-commerce. And they want to do things the way that they get elsewhere. We have customers using propane for e-commerce. I'm not going to labor on this because Julie and Ted are going to do it right in a minute. Obviously, for will call, they don't like the call, so that kind of breaks down the whole will call model. Where do you push them? How do you navigate price tiers and things? Customer-owned tanks, we know that this is, again, a hot potato. Lead gen, Julie's going to talk about growing propane business using e-commerce by pushing out the reach of the search and the zip code for your e-commerce system to get leads, full service, keep fill leads for your propane business. And then the sale of appliances online using some of the features in an e-commerce system that allow for buying things other than fuel. So with that as context, I'd like to spend the rest of the time letting Julie and Ted talk. That's pretty good. Are you guys ready to roll here?
Ready.
All right.
I'm ready.
Okay, so I'm just going through some of the chat here. So I remind the audience, please chat in your questions. Once we get started here, I'm sure this will provoke. Let me just ask some of the things that were brought up prior to the webinar by some of the folks who were going to be joining. Maybe I'll ask Ted and Julie to both the whole model of digital engagement, automating the order to cash process, handling digital consumers. Julie, why don't you start off and give us some thoughts about e-commerce in general, because you do have e-commerce in place.
Yeah, so we've had e-commerce in place for, I think, just about 3 years, and it's really been ramping up year after year for us. Obviously, it started on the distillate side of the business, and where we've naturally seen a lot of crossover to propane that really started putting us in the mindset of exploring new options was that our distillate customers who also use propane were growing frustrated that they could order their fuel oil online, but if they had propane for cooking in their hot water heater, they had to use a different process for that. So after we heard that a handful of times, we started really exploring the options about, if we're able to offer this great service on one side, why wouldn't we be able to offer it on the other side? And therefore it fits everybody's need. It's definitely a growing piece of our business model. Last year, I had run some numbers. Our propane business at the end of 2019 was about 31% will call and 69% automatic. What I found most interesting was actually the rate, though, that the will call piece of our business was growing. So the will call piece of our business is actually growing at 54%. Right now, like I said, it makes up that 30%, but it's growing at a rate of 54%. So more than half of our new customers that we're taking on are that will call customer. Now, obviously, as all of us try to navigate all the ever-changing landscape, I'm trying to find ways that we can continue to accept that growth and at the same time not add overhead. And that's really where e-commerce just fits nice and neat into the package, that it's a way, marketing tool that can be used to generate leads, set up accounts. It can be fully automated with your back-end system. So you're really able to grow your business with minimal human interaction. I'm sure at some point we'll get into, some things that might still be a little clunky logistically, but as far as I can see, everything that we're able to do is moving the needle faster than if we were just to not use these tools at all.
Cool. Ted, any thoughts on sort of e-commerce in general? Maybe you could answer the existential question of, do customers really want it or really need it in propane? I know you have some recent experience with this.
Yeah, I think the answer is they absolutely want it. I have a slew of children, all of who own their own homes, and all of them consume energy. And one of the four is actually on a automatic delivery type arrangement with their supplier. Well, one of them's on natural gas, so obviously that has its own system of delivery. But they they clearly don't want to interact with people literally face to face, whether that's in person, which you can't do now anyway, or via phone. They'll consider doing business only with people that they can do business with on an e-commerce basis. And the proof is how well does your website work? How much work do they have to perform to, actually, get a delivery? It's been a wake-up call for me the last 10 years.
Yeah, it's interesting. Talk about that a little bit, Ted, if you don't mind, because I just got another question here that I think dovetail on that. So one of the things about your career in this industry is that you've been sort of a pillar in the propane space for a very long part of this journey, right? So you've seen a lot happen in this industry. You've seen a lot of trends come and go. What, in your mind, how have you seen this? So how are dealers sort of reacting? Maybe a better way to ask this is how do you see the dealer community reacting to this digital first consumer?
Well,
has it been with fear?
There's a fair amount of acceptance, but as recently as a couple months ago, I met with a dealer to present a platform type opportunity, and they kind of said, well, this will call customer really, that's really not what we consider our customer. Yeah. And I thought, well, you're ignoring whether you like it or not, the growing percentage of the market because the automatic delivery customers, whether it be heating oil or propane, of course less so with propane, that pay for a premium service policy as well as go on a budget, so they are less inclined to look at the unit price for the commodity. Those people are, there's less of them today, less of them right now than there was an hour ago, because they're not virus related, but they're dying off, or moving into assisted living, and they're being replaced by someone in their mid 20s to early 30s that recognize made the American dream by owning their own home, or that type of thing, which is more our customer base than the apartment dwellers. But it's not whether we should do this or not. It's how should we do this, and who should we partner up as we're heading in that direction.
Yeah, let me just add one little quick side note. It's a really important point. One of the parts of today's session, in terms of how we marketed it and talked about it, was this will call customer. And I know that in the propane industry, that's got a different connotation than it does in heating oil. But what I like to say when I'm talking to propane folks is stop using the word will call for everyone and start using on demand. I think Ted is right. We know for sure, based on research, that there are less and less people wanting automatic delivery where their dealer is controlling all aspects of their business. And we're seeing more and more on-demand customers. But we're also seeing a continuation of a devaluing that dealers across the spectrum, whether it's propane or heating oil or whatever they're selling, even in co-ops, will devalue that will call customer, because a certain profile comes to mind, right? Somebody with a terrible FICO score who wants to be disruptive, who wants to pay cash to the driver and tip over your whole operation for a day. That just isn't true. The will call customer has changed dramatically. Not only are there more and more of them, Julie's data was pretty fascinating. First time I've even heard those numbers, and Julie and I talk quite a lot. That's what the industry is seeing. More and more people moving to an on-demand / will call, away from that automatic keep full mindset, because the consumers are changing. They want to control things. They don't want you to control things for them anymore. But the profile has changed. I'll give you a quick example, and then Julie, I want to let you talk about this a little bit. I live in central New Hampshire, in the mountains. We have a lot of degree days here. It's very cold, snows a lot, drives me a little bit nuts, and I have cabin fever. But although I work for an e-commerce company, I am a dyed-in-the-wool full-service propane company. It's automatic. I have a service contract. Anything that my local dealer wants to sell me, I'll buy. And it's just because I travel a lot, and it's just how I'm conditioned to do business. My neighbors are retired pediatricians from Boston, and they need e-commerce. As Ted said, even though they're much older than Ted's kids, he's always needling me about the fact that why don't you just do it online? Why do you have to have this really friction-based relationship with your propane company? I was like, you know what? I don't see it that way. But the point is, the profile has changed. The will call customer cannot be devalued. They cannot be ignored. They're more of an on-demand customer, and they're really, a lot of them are mainstream fuel customers or millennials who could easily buy from you any way they want, and are just choosing a different way. And just, Julie, I didn't know if you had any thoughts about that, especially in your area where you're seeing enormous growth in will call.
Yeah, I mean, I think if we can be successful with it, we're in an extremely rural area, so we have every excuse for it not to work and not be successful. And it's funny, I remember probably 8 or 9 years ago, we went through this initiative where we were really hell-bent on getting email addresses from our customer base. And a person who's no longer with us at the time kept saying, our customer base is old, they're not going to give us emails, this is a waste of time. So we gave CSRs $1 per email that they collected and just had them basically call all day long. We were able to obtain email addresses for about 70% of our customer base through that initiative. And the interesting thing was how many of those little old ladies that were more than willing to give an email address and had communicated, we were kind of waiting for you guys to start talking to us this way. And this was almost 10 years ago at this point in time. So I think the as you talked about earlier, Mark, the experiences that people have in different platforms are not just for millennials anymore. And in light of everything that's going on, so many people that I know that are friends of my parents, they're using Instacart for the first time. People are becoming more and more conditioned into using apps and to using their cell phones to get business done because everything else just feels harder. So I definitely think if we can be successful with it here, the demand is out there. And kind of the approach that we take is we're still aware that there is an automatic full service client out there. We're just very tuned into the fact that that is a shrinking pool. So if we want to have sustainability as a business, we can't continue to rely on only one small pool of customers that is continuing to shrink. We recognized probably about 4 years ago that there was really an untapped market available in the will call space. And that's really what's catapulted our business into growth, is kind of not necessarily getting away from servicing just automatic full service customers. We love them too, but at the same time, identifying this opportunity that really doubles down on growth opportunities in our market. And it's only can continue to pay tenfold for us.
Somebody just popped in a quick modifying question about what is driving the idea of more on-demand customers. I might have touched on it a little bit in terms of the profile is changing, the way that they do business is changing. I think if you looked at some of the research that's been done around the fuel industry, NORA, I know it's oil heat, but I think the consumer mindset is the same. In fact, I have both fuels here. My business partner who's on the phone has both fuels. I think it really boils down to, if you look at what drives consumers, forget the word propane for a second, it's self-determination. And in some respects, and again, I'm not saying that this is 100% right, I'm just what we see in our business, because we have in addition to a large network of dealers using e-commerce, of course, there's hundreds of thousands of consumers on the other end of that. And we're able to survey and do some research of our own and keep a good repository of data if anybody's ever interested. Not in terms of customer intel, but behaviors in an aggregate. The whole idea of somebody else deciding when to come to my house to bring me something is not appealing to what Julie is describing as an on-demand customer. It's as if a huge part of our value prop, which is we're going to take the hassle of watching your gauge away from you and come when you need fuel, weirdly enough, is starting to conflict with how consumers think. They're like, no, I'm in control. I don't want you to come when you want to come. I want you to come when I want to come, when I want you to come. I have an unpredictable usage. Or in my case here, listen, I'll throw a little shade at my local dealer. I have a 500-gallon tank outside, and the driver will pull in and check my gauge and then pull out. And I'm like, really? And then he'll come back 2 weeks later and drop 57 gallons. I'm like, guys, what are you doing here, right? So I have been tempted to move to an on-demand, because they do have on-demand e-commerce, but that's what's driving that segment. It's flying in the face of how they do business. It's not how they do business elsewhere, and they want to be self-determination. They want to be calling the shots. And we're seeing the decline in full service and automatic, whatever word you want to use, keep fulls. We're seeing that decline in propane. We're certainly seeing it more for the folks who are in heating oil as well as propane in the phone, because I know that there were some I saw. It's definitely happening in heating oil. I think it's a phenomenon in the industry. Okay, so moving on here. Julie, just so everybody on the call knows here, Julia had embarked about 3 years ago, I think, Julie, maybe 4, on completely rebuilding their technology ecosystem, starting with the back office system. And then Julie knew that consumer-facing technology was where it's at. So they have one of the most sophisticated customer engagement ecosystems I've seen, and they're a mid-size independent, but have done a really good job of building out a customer ecosystem. Julie, why don't you talk a little bit about your project, and then answer the question that I got, which is, isn't a portal e-commerce? Aren't I already sort of doing these things with my portal? And maybe you can touch upon the differences.
Sure. Well, it's funny, time flies when you're having fun, Mark, because it was actually 6 years ago at this point in time that we embarked on that journey. And basically we did what a lot of fuel dealers do, is we were at a point in the business where the business had grown stale. Couldn't really figure out why. We were constantly searching for that automatic full service customer, and they just weren't coming to us. And so we started by, okay, we're going to implement some technology for our back end system, and that's going to save us money, and that's going to make us more financially viable. Great. So we implement a new back end system, and through some real careful tactical moves, we really were able to move the needle of the business. We were able to save a lot on expenses. We were enabled to get a lot of customers on a paperless platform, and we were able to increase our auto pays. So we were kind of dabbling in that. Our current portal system that we had at the time was portal systems of the past. Basically, all you could do was look at a couple things on your account and make a payment. It really was not user friendly. And what we found is once we got the right back end system in place and the right people in place to drive the back end system, our tolerance went down for really having a clunky experience anyplace else. And we started to identify, like I mentioned earlier, this will call customer that was growing in our area, and that, you know, we had very carefully taken a few on thinking they were going to be a disaster. And then when they didn't turn out to be a disaster, we kind of let the reins out a little bit. So at that point in time, we then implemented a new portal system. And where this is really important is to some of the things Mark was talking about, you know, a system that offers a point of all things communication can really relieve a lot of stress on your back end team. So our portal solution that we've partnered with, it allows for a full customer experience. It allows for texting and email communications. You know, we've been talking about that a lot today, about how email's pretty dead. But even, you know, Mark had made the comment about being at people's houses. We were surprised that when we enabled text alerts, how many of our automatic customers were requesting the service. And when you think about it, it is a little odd to have somebody just completely in control of when they're going to come to your house unannounced. So we actually turned on texting and email alerts for all of our automatic customers, which has also helped us save a lot on deliveries that are not necessary. To Mark's point, if they're an irregular user or it's maybe a seasonal residence, we've had plenty of times where the text alert or email's gone out notifying them we'll be there the next day. And we've come in the morning to a message to say, hey, here's an updated gauge reading. You don't need to come today. We can reforecast those tickets. So technology has been able to really help us on the back end side of our business logistically, but also on the front end side of our business, because the other piece that we found is the more we started to use technology, the more frequently we were able to talk to customers, and that actually kept them more engaged. There's definitely this notion out there that the will call customer is not loyal. And it's really not true. They do want to be talked to. They just want to feel more in control. And so we were able to really amp up the amount of times we were talking with customers, keeping them engaged, keeping them with fair prices. And we did use a model where, you know, if they're using some of our e-commerce tools, that we're passing along the savings to them, which is received really well. The third piece of our technology platform was, like Mark said, you know, plugging in that full e-commerce model. And I'll hit on the question specifically that Mark asked about the differences between the two. So we use our portal to really manage the relationship with our existing customers or any new, what we'll call the full service customers that we onboard. We want them to have availability to their account whenever it's convenient for them. That way they don't have to worry about our store, you know, our operational hours. But we also really needed a way to grow the business, and a portal won't really grow your business. It'll just improve it'll improve your customer satisfaction. The e-commerce businesses, if you're using the right tool, become their own marketing machine. So we use our e-commerce business to go out and look for the business. That's where we're spending a lot of our SEO dollars. That's where we're formulating our website to be responsive to what people are searching for, because once those people find us, they can create an account, which is fully integrated in our backend system. So you create it on the e-commerce platform, and then it's instantly created in the back office. The payment automatically comes through, the delivery automatically comes through, and nobody has to touch it. So I think that's really the differentiating factor between the two, is our portal is really meant to manage relationships with existing customers, where the e-commerce platform that we use is really meant to drive and grow our business.
Beautiful. One quick add, somebody just popped in a question, then Ted, you're becoming very popular. I have two questions for you. Julie, somebody asked, and I know who this person is, and this is a great question for you. What advice would you give other people in your position, which is basically the next generation coming up in the industry, more technology minded? How did you convince your more traditional owners, and literally in your case, family partners in the business, to implement this technology in e-commerce?
Yeah, I personally have all the experience with this. So when we started this technology roadmap and we started with our back-end system, that was where at the time things felt the most clunky. Our staff were really frustrated, our customers were frustrated, and even some of the things that we wanted to do to improve customer satisfaction, we couldn't because we didn't have the tools. So everything felt hard. So we kind of actually it was my father and my uncle charged me with, really navigating. They didn't want to go through a software change at all because they'd already been through 3 or 4 of them. They were all a disaster. So they really charged me with doing the legwork and proving to them why this was going to be the right move. So I basically put together a PowerPoint presentation, and I shudder when I look at it because it's very rough, of all the things that the new back-end software could achieve, and then what that equated to in dollars. Then I took that presentation and I actually gave them a formal presentation about why we needed these tools and the financial impact it was going to make on the business. So at the time, because our business was a little flat, it was really good because it felt relief of, okay, we're going to invest in this software, but look at all the money we're going to save. She's clearly outlined the money part. So then when those things started coming to fruition after we went live, I had already created this really high level of buy-in and of trust that there was legitimacy to what she researched. There was legitimacy to the results. What else can we tamper with? And because we had the right back-end system in place, all of a sudden customer-facing tools needed to work and could work better if you had the right tools. So once we kind of started presenting an idea and then we checked it off the list and we saw buy-in and we saw growth, it just continued to manifest from there.
Cool. I can connect the two of you too, because I think it would be good if you guys met. It'd be fun. A couple of Ted, 2 questions for you, Ted. And if we're running, well, the hour mark is flexible, but maybe we can just keep an eye on the time and shorten all of our answers here. So 2 different people wrote a very similar question about 2 wildly different topics. So what is your view on the future of tank monitoring, it is related. We get a lot of obviously tank monitor companies who want to partner with us to embed a monitor with our e-commerce solution. What do you see as the future of tank monitors in the propane industry? And also the biggie, Ted, you get to have this one. What do you see as the future of customer-owned tanks?
Two very good questions. I've been a fan of tank monitors for a lot longer than most people. I met with a marketer back in my energy days 15 years ago, who was a refined fuels guy who got into the propane business, and he made the comment to me. He said, we don't know how to forecast propane delivery, so 95% of our propane customers installations, company-owned installations, have tank monitors. And of course, that was maybe 15 years ago. So that technology is completely changed, actually several times since that. What it does become is, from personal experience, is a little bit of a challenge in monitoring the fact that the monitors are actually working. And there's, creates a different, some different tasks internally that, relying on or thinking that any machine is going to work flawlessly 100% of the time or 99.9% of the time is pretty naive. But I firmly believe, more tank monitors are better. One of my interesting experiences, and I'll just move on to the second question because I know we're short on time, is that a recent experience of mine is I found that on an automatic delivery customer basis, we were only marginally better delivering to tanks that had tank monitors than we were to people that were on degree days or some other forecasting factor. But we did find that there was customers that liked the idea of, even of being able to monitor their own tank water through a smartphone or some type of thing like that. I guess we can kind of skip the marks of the tablets because nobody really uses them anymore, or not much. Remind me again what the second question was, Mark.
Customer owned tanks.
Yeah, that's only going in one direction, and we all know that there are certain markets in the country where customer-owned tanks represent 75, 80, 85% of the customer base are customer-owned tanks. So not in the Northeast, but there are markets in the country, Texas, where that's just has been common. As tanks get more and more expensive, it's more and more common for marketers to say, I'd rather sell them the tank and install it, take my chances as far as whether I get to actually fill that tank with propane over the years, but at least I don't have a worry about a $2,000 investment out there, and especially if it's a will call customer, whether they're actually somebody else is putting product in my tank. So it's and there's also more states that are making tank control by the marketer less and less attractive. Being a guy that had a number of years working in Vermont, which is we won't get into a political discussion here, but they kind of started the process of making sure that you were willing to sell your tank to the customer or to a competitor to minimize the inconvenience of switching suppliers. So it's got a long ways to go, but there's going to be a higher percentage of customer-owned tanks a year from now than there are now.
Yeah, we're seeing the same thing, and there's a couple of questions I don't want to ignore, and one of them is really, really a great question that I want to get to here in a second. Yeah, we're seeing more and more of the customer-owned tanks. Certainly up in my neck of the woods here in New Hampshire, it's definitely becoming local dealers are friends of mine, and we talk a lot, and they're seeing more and more of it. We don't take a position as a company whether we love it or hate it. We just know that it's a thing. It's more about the consumers, again, wanting freedom. They don't want to be locked down. They don't want you to own the tank and then make it very difficult for them to move. That mindset alone really is going to irritate a lot of today's consumers. Not to say that there's not obviously more room in the space for the continuation of company-owned tanks, but you're going to see more and more. E-commerce obviously is a way to do that because that customer becomes transient. But Julie, this actually leads me to a question, and I promise to get back to the two others that are still waiting for answers, but this is sort of dovetail. So in terms of customer-owned tanks, company-owned tanks, e-commerce, all of this, how do you handle the obvious safety concerns? It's the big thing in propane that does not exist in the distillate market. And how do you handle the safety concerns with tanks that you don't own? Or Ted, maybe if you have a quick comment on that in the context of time, Jules.
So we're fortunate that in our market, we don't have a ton of customer-owned tanks. But in the case that, those opportunities do arise, New York State has some pretty strict safety regulations in place. And we've just kind of found that it's no more cumbersome to follow them for a will call than for the automatic. The desire to keep everyone safe is the same. If we are using an e-commerce platform to generate a new customer, doing a full gas check is part of that process, and that part is a little bit manual. There's no full automation for that piece yet, but that piece is important. So the customer basically sets up their own account online with us, and then we get a notification saying, wait a minute, before we can make any deliveries, we need to make sure that you're safe. Let me schedule a time to get somebody out there. We send somebody out there. if we had more customers out there who did own their own tanks, maybe we'd look at some additional charges for that. But right now, we're really using the e-commerce platform more to manage that existing customer, where there might still be a little bit of manual setup on the front end, but after that point moving forward, they're 100% automated. So it's a customer base we don't have to spend a lot of time and energy to interact with at that point in time.
Okay, so let me just fill in the blank real quick. And again, this is not meant to be a sales pitch, it's just I'm trying to provide some reference here. So our company or anybody who does e-commerce for propane or in the heating fuels market seriously will have separate modules. In our case, we have a separate propane module, which is very different than the heating module because obviously the journey the customer takes is not only different, it's more complex because of the safety concerns. So within a good e-commerce system for propane, there'll be good indemnity contracts. There'll be a process triggered for a gas check for a non-company owned tank. All those sort of gaps have been filled. The customer takes an automated journey, but to Julie's point, you can't automate a gas check. But you can at least alert the consumer in a digital way that you'll get back to them and that you need to keep their safety first and foremost. So that is covered in a good e-commerce system. A quick question here, there's a little sort of tangential to this, which is somebody asked, when do you take the payment? And if so, what forms of payment? Julie, I'll let you answer that real quick, but we call it cash before delivery because the payment is made before the truck rolls. So Julie, if you want to maybe go through that process real quick, because I think that's really important for some folks.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the biggest benefits of the e-commerce module is that there is never again a forgotten to pick up payment and now you're chasing somebody for money. In a good e-commerce platform, the payment is collected at the point of ordering, just like it would be on Amazon, Walmart.com, any other engagement that you have. So you have all of your money up front for that transaction, which relieves stress on the driver, relieves stress on the office staff. And again, all those things can be automated into your back-end system so that the payments are automatically posted and put into the correct batches. So the money's accounted for. And then, really good e-commerce also has the ability to do the backside of that transaction. So what's your next question? Okay, well, they paid for a full tank, but they didn't take a full tank. They only took, 70% of that or whatever. The tools that we use have all this automation in place so that the refunds happen automatically. The posting of those refunds happens automatically. It really keeps the whole transaction smooth for the customer. But it's really great because we just never have to worry about somebody forgetting to note a ticket or forget to pick up money, or the money changes hands from driver to dispatcher up to customer service. And now, some money's missing and chasing that down. It wipes away all those problems, which is really great.
Okay, cool. I'm going to field this one unless, Ted, you have a comment to make. And I have one other question for you, Ted. So I'm going to read this question because it's worth me not paraphrasing it. So natural gas does not provide a consumer with the similar controls for their product, right? Which is the consumer wants to be in control of natural gas, they can't be. Propane industry strives for seamless energy delivery through the absence of runouts, obviously true. Since they don't have the control over natural gas, why would consumers want it over propane other than maybe a notification when the bobtail arrives? I think that this is sort of an age-old question for industry. And that is because consumers have, when they use a utility, they know they really don't have any control, that the utility is going to control everything. And they've made a choice there, whether because of cost or whether because they're in an area where they are just natural gas is in their home. It's no different than they don't pull up to the gas station and start bartering for a lower price the way they do with propane dealers when they want a lower price, right? So there's places consumers know they have control and places they know they don't. But the real issue over time has been natural gas is you pay for what you use. It's metered, it's easy, and in certain propane markets that can be done if you're in a community or whatever, but for the most part, propane is being determined by the dealer. They're deciding when to come. That delivery may be appealing to you, that delivery may not be appealing to you. At some of the research that's been done, almost 50% of fuel customers don't trust that their fuel dealer won't run them out. That's a big number. That's shifted a lot over time. So there's no doubt that dealers are extremely good at degree day oriented deliveries. But I think in terms of the unpredictable stuff, those customers are always going to be will call, and anything, whether it's Julian or days between, whatever method you're using to forecast, typically is a sort of an educated guess, and the consumer just wants to have better control over that and when deliveries happen. But to Julie's point, you also, and to your point as well, Mr. Questioner, they do like having a notification, notifying as Julie said, this push into e-commerce caused them to also look at how they could better serve their automatic or keep fills. And I think that is smart, that notifying those customers, staying in better touch, giving them a heads up, giving them the option to say, whoa, no, don't call me, I'm at 80%. I don't know what you guys are doing over there, kind of thing, and avoiding a short fill or a driver not filling at all. I think natural gas is just a different beast because you pay for what you use, and it's a utility, so you feel like you're powerless. Consumers in our world tend to assert control where they can, and know that they can't assert control in other places. A utility is definitely a rare place where the company is still in control and not the consumer, which is really a good story for propane dealers who are up against natural gas. Is, do you really want to have this to your energy needs being met by someone who A, doesn't know who you are, and B, is complete control of that relationship. Ted, this one is for you. We're going to wrap it up here in a couple of minutes.
Okay.
So how do you feel, well, let's put it this way. What is your prediction about how propane dealers will ultimately adapt to this new consumer who's demanding a technology-based engagement? If you put your Swami's hat on, how do you think this is going to roll out? What do you think the challenges might be?
Well, I think the majority of them of propane dealers, and the last number I saw was that excluding the big 6 or big 7, there's still 5,000 or so independent propane dealers in the United States, and I have to believe, I have nothing to prove this, that a large percentage, say more than half, will have some form of e-commerce platform to attract new customers, or they'll sell their business to a consolidator because it's just too complicated for them, or they just don't want to think beyond the aspects of the business that they might have thought about traditionally in the last 20 years. I like to think that's not the case, and as generations replace people my age, they're more aware of these needs, and they're less inclined to have to fight with fathers or grandfathers or uncles to adopt this technology. And by using, as I suggested, the right partner to help you get started in this, it'll get progressively less expensive. It's kind of like flat screen TVs. The more you produce, the lower the unit costs, and there's more options for customization. And someone comes up with a good idea of an added feature to a e-commerce platform, and suddenly that's available almost for free, to the next group that's interested in buying it. I think you have to. My caution would be, stay focused on the business that you're in. Recognize the need to bring in the right partners for this. And, don't develop a whole big IT group within your company. And suddenly you're an IT company. You're not really a propane or heating oil marketer. Focus on the core products that you sell, but trust me, selling it via e-commerce it's here to stay.
Jules, I'll give you the last word and let the audience go. What is the biggest benefit, most important thing to come out of your customer-facing technology with e-commerce and portals?
I just think that it makes the relationship for everyone easy. And, you know, I'll actually use the situation that we're in as an example, because we've invested in technology as a whole. With everything going on, we are an energy company. Obviously, we're considered an essential service, but at the same time, we're able to have all of our employees working remotely right now who choose to, which is keeping everyone much safer. And I think if there was ever a time that people are evaluating how they do business and what their options are, it's right now. So for, you know, the best part for us is, okay, so customers are getting text messages and emails out the day before we come for a delivery. So now they know when a stranger's coming to their home. They can notify us, I'm sick, tell them not to come in, leave the ticket at the door. Any of these things, the ability to just have this real-time communication without having to have CSRs manually making all these phone calls really makes things streamlined for the customer as well as for your employees, which we have proven beyond a shadow of a doubt that when you enhance the customer experience, your employees get the back end benefit of that, because customers are just much more pleasant to deal with. And we've seen that play tenfold with being able to retain good staff as well. So I think really pay attention right now is kind of my big message that I want to say, because even if you're not a believer that this is coming or this is relevant right now, it's relevant more than ever in the moment that we're in. Like I said earlier, people I know who are using Instacart for the first time because they're getting grocery delivery, trying to protect their families. If there's ever been a time how consumers are evaluating how they have a relationship with you, and if consumers appreciate the relationship they have with you, they'll let you know right now.
Awesome. Ted and Julia, thank you so much. Thank you to the audience for hanging in there. Thanks for the great questions. We have a recording of this. We will be reaching out to you. If you have further questions for Ted or Julia or myself, or you want to challenge something or whatever, feel free to reach back. Enjoy the rest of your week. Please stay safe and healthy and keep your family safe and healthy, and have a good day, everybody.